All right, welcome back everyone. We're moving forward with our open book training, and this week we're going to look at two of our other three categories of expenses, our final two categories, direct labor and overheads. So as we talked about in previous modules, we've got three different kinds of expenses in our restaurant. First, we've got cost of goods sold. Remember, cost of goods sold is the cost of all of our ingredients, okay? Now today, we're going to talk about this one right here, direct labor, and you're going to come to think of that as the cost of our team. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about is overheads, and that's going to be the cost of everything else, okay? Let's move on and talk about direct labor. So here's the key point with direct labor. Direct labor is the sum of all the expenses required to employ our team. Say it with me now. Direct labor is the sum of all the expenses required to employ our team. We're going to hear that many times, so keep it in mind and don't forget it. So now let's talk about what's part of our direct labor expense. Well, let's start by thinking about a paycheck, and actually your paycheck. So what's in your paycheck? Let's take a closer look before we start talking about, for our business at Rail Trail, what we need to pay. Let's think about you for a second. All right, now let's think about you for a second. Let's say you got paid 12 bucks an hour here at Rail Trail. Now, is that what you're going to take home? 12 bucks an hour for every hour that you work? You work 10 hours a week, you get 120 bucks, $12 an hour times 10 hours, boom, 120 bucks, that's what's on your check? No, I don't think so. I think you know that. You're going to have some payroll deductions. And after those payroll deductions, you might be making something more like, I don't know, $10.18 an hour, okay? What's up with that? Well, what's up with that is taxes. Taxes taking a bite out of your shiny apple because that's part of our responsibility. We work, we get paid through a business, we got to pay our taxes. Now, what you might not know is that the business does its share as well. You just may not have ever seen it. So let's take a look on the next slide about what that's look like. All right, so you know that when you get paid, you're paying taxes for every hour that you work. It looks like over $1.50 if you were to be making 12 bucks an hour. But what you may not know is that the business does the exact same thing on our side. So for example, did you know that the business pays to pay you by paying a FICA match? So you pay FICA, we pay FICA, okay? More taxes. Then we've got unemployment, federal and state insurance that we need to pay, more taxes. And then, oh, guess what? The Workforce Training Fund, which has done a great job in supporting our open book training here. Every business in the state of Massachusetts pays into that fund. More taxes. And then guess what? Workers' compensation. Every business in the state pays into a fund so that if somebody gets hurt on the job, they can be insured. Guess what that is? More taxes and insurance, okay? So now, when you're getting $10 and whatever cents an hour to you, coming out of a $12 wage, for the business, it actually costs us more than 12 bucks to pay. It's going to cost us about $13.68 on the P&L to pay you 12 bucks an hour. What's up with that? Lots of bites out of the apple. But here's the thing. We have a responsibility as a business to pay our fair share of taxes. Taxes that fund the roads and the schools and all the other things that we need in the infrastructure of our community. So we're happy to pay it, but now you as an employee recognize that every business is going to pay you more to have you on the team than whatever your nominal rate is. You make 12 bucks an hour, we're paying 13.5 in order to keep you on the team, which we're happy to do. But remember, part of this whole open book thing is getting you to understand what the expenses are in our business so you can help us run as profitable a business as possible and make sure we're thrilling our guests while also being able to pay our fair share of taxes along the way. Okay, so it's not just what we pay each person to work at the restaurant plus all the payroll taxes we have to pay that's included in direct labor expense. Remember, direct labor expense is the sum of all the expenses required to employ you and everybody else on the team. So what else might be in that? Well, let's think about it. How about benefits? Sick pay, health insurance, retirement plans, things that we do on the benefit level primarily for our full-time people, but these are things that the business is going to incur as expenses. And then, oh, by the way, what about staff meals and staff discounts and things that we do in order to provide food for our team? How about stuff like uniforms and t-shirts and things like that? You know, we have a great thing that we started at Rail Trail where if you're with us for 2 years, you get a really nice hoodie to recognize your time with us. That's part of direct labor expense. Oh, by the way, we run mini games in the business. Mini games, as you might remember, are games that we play to try and improve performance in the business, and you're going to get a reward on the team if we achieve success. That's part of direct labor. Hey, oh, by the way, we love throwing parties for the staff every year. We do them multiple times a year. They're a great time. They're a great way to build the team and to reward our performance. That counts as direct labor expense. Oh, by the way, if we're paying out anything in actual dollars in a paycheck to you, we got to pay payroll taxes like we just talked about, okay? So now that's part of direct labor expense. And what about turnover expense? Now, you might not know what turnover means, but I'm sure you've been in a situation where you've seen someone come in or been a member of the team with you, and then they left our business for whatever reason, and then we had to hire somebody else. That's called turnover. When somebody turns over in the position, we need to bring a new person onto the team. Turnover expense is a big part of our direct labor expense. And oh, by the way, it's not just the wages for training and shifts, it's both. We've got to pay someone to come in and train, and then we've got to pay people to train them. And then, oh, by the way, there's a bunch of hiring expenses that go into that. And oh, by the way, we need admin time to interview people to be able to make sure we're putting good people on our team that are as effective and fit our culture as everybody else that we've got. You know, people like you. So how do we control direct labor? There's a lot of different stuff in there, a lot of different parts of the expense that can be in there. Well, there's a few things that we want to be thinking about. First, I want you to take a moment, pause this video, and write down a couple of different ways that you think a restaurant can reduce and control its direct labor. Now, you're going to review these responses with your mentor. When you're ready, press play on the video again, and we'll keep going. Okay, welcome back. So now, what other strategies could help create good profit around controlling direct labor? Hopefully you remember that good profit is what we're all about here at the Rail Trail. We don't want to create bad profit, and strategies around direct labor to reduce that expense could create bad profit. So pause the video again, go back up to your list of strategies, and right next to them, good profit or bad profit. And then if you haven't come up with examples for either one of these, good or bad, take another minute, write down a couple of things that you think might create good or bad profit. What you should have at the end is a list of strategies, and each of them identifying its good profit creating, bad profit creating. Share that and discuss that with your mentor. When you're ready, press play and we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so remember this little model over here, stakeholder model, okay? So we're going to review. At the end of the day, we want to create good profit here at Rail Trail. And good profit means that all the interests of all the different stakeholders are respected. We may not be able to do the best thing for every group every time with every decision we make, but we got to respect the interests and the communities of people that are participating in what it means to be able to run our business. Okay, so when it comes to direct labor, we could do things that would really make that direct labor number awesome. We could pay people not enough. We could work people really hard and harder than we should and not staff adequately. But guess what? If we run short shifts all the time, you know who's not going to be happy? Well, you're probably not going to be happy because you're going to be really having a hard time every time you're at work. And guess what? The guests aren't going to be very happy. And then ultimately, the business isn't going to be very happy because then we got an unhappy team and unhappy guests, and that's not a very good long-term plan. Don't you think? Okay, so good profit's where we're at. That's how we want to manage direct labor line on our expenses, by creating good profit and finding ways to create an efficient team that is fairly compensated and giving our guests an amazing experience. So here's a key point on direct labor. It's not just about cutting labor. What we want to do is grow good profit, okay? And we're going to talk about ways that we can do that through this presentation. Ultimately, remember that we're all in this thing together. you're all in on significant profit sharing opportunity here at the Rail Trail, meaning that if we all responsibly and efficiently control our direct labor expense, that's going to let our business enable us to pay everybody higher wages over time and to do a great job with profit sharing because we're running a really profitable business, okay? That's the way that we want to manage direct labor, not just by cutting our way to saving some short-term money, but by continually growing good profit so that we can pay great wages, give great profit sharing opportunities to everybody on the team, and run an efficient business while we're doing it. And remember, the key point around direct labor and what direct labor is the sum of all the expenses required to employ our team. All the expenses required to employ our team. One more time. All the expenses required to employ our team. Okay, so now let's talk about what we think are the primary and most effective strategies to controlling direct labor. Number one, we want to use a plan versus actual. What was our plan for direct labor expense? What did we actually spend? And is there a gap that we need to be managing? Okay, that might sound familiar because we talked about that with cost of goods sold. What did we plan for cost of goods sold? What was it actually? Okay, what's the gap? That's where we got an opportunity to go make an improvement. The next strategy is we want to be really good about turnover and hiring expenses. When we get really great at hiring excellent people like you who can contribute to our team really effectively, we keep turnover costs and hiring expenses down. That's a big contributor to direct labor, as you'll see in just a few slides. And then growing incremental revenue. We don't necessarily, as we talked about, want to cut labor as a way to improve direct labor. But if we can grow revenue incrementally, there's more resources available to have labor in place, okay? So we're going to talk more in detail about each of these going forward, starting on the next slide. All right, as I mentioned on the previous slide, we have this idea about plan versus actual from our cost of goods work. So remember, cost of goods, we have this actual cost of goods here. So we spent $40,000. We had planned to spend $35,000 based on the costing that we've done on our menu and what we sold, which means there was a gap, an opportunity of $5,000 in that example. Now, we can do the same thing for direct labor. There's a gap, and we think about that as the opportunity. Here's what we planned to do. Here's what it was. The difference between the two is the gap, or where our opportunity for improvement is. So with cost of goods, the plan was here's what we expect to spend in our cost of ingredients for any given dish. So that's how we come up with our plan. But what do you think a direct labor plan looks like? It may be something that you see even before you really got familiar with any of this open book stuff. Maybe it comes out once a week or something like that. Oh, I think you might be getting it. It's the schedule. It's the schedule. The schedule is our plan for direct labor. And when we take what each person on that schedule makes and the number of hours they're scheduled, bing, bang, boom, there we go. There's our plan for direct labor for the week. Okay, so you knew what the direct labor plan was without even knowing it. Look at you. Amazing. Okay, so here's what a direct labor plan, a staffing plan might look like, okay, on a Monday, okay? Not on a Tuesday, on a Monday, okay? So here's a Monday staffing plan. It's broken down by 30-minute increments here, okay? Right down the list right there, okay? And then across the top, we've got jobs that we're going to need. So host, busters, dishwashers, prep, so on and so forth. Okay, and then in here, we've got units. How many people need to be in that job during those hours, okay? So Monday staffing plan, boom, right there it is, okay? And 208 hours is what we're looking at. So that means the plan for direct labor is 208 hours on a Monday. Now, let's take a look at what happened over 3 Mondays in this example. 20th of June, we did 214 hours above the plan. Oh my goodness, what happened in July? July 11th, we did 274 hours. 270 more, that's crazy. All right, now July 18th, not as bad as July 11th, but hey, not so great either. July 18th, 233 hours, okay? The average of those 3 weeks was 240 hours. Our plan, right down here, was 208. Boom, actual was 240. Now, you might be saying, oh, well, I mean, it's only a couple hours here, a couple hours there, no big deal. Well, the gap here is 32 hours, okay? And if we were to take an estimated value of what those 32 hours might add up to, okay, well, maybe that's $440 per day, okay? Which again, big number, but not a huge number, except there's 52 of these Mondays in a year. Oh my goodness, $23,000 a year. $23,000 a year if we were to run like this every Monday, okay? And oh my goodness, I can't even imagine if we ran like this 274. What if we did that? I mean, now we're looking at something like, I don't know, $50,000. And oh, by the way, that's just in terms of like the hourly salary. That doesn't include all the taxes on top of it or anything like that. This really starts adding up. So hopefully you're starting to see it's really important for us to have a good plan for direct labor and to make sure that we don't go crazy going over that on a weekly basis. All right, so now let's talk about turnover and hiring expense in a little bit more detail. But before we do that, have you ever been in a situation where someone is new to the job and you can just tell right away they're not going to cut it, they're not going to fit in? That's a terrible feeling, right? Or how about you find out that you're working with X, Y, or Z person on a shift and you're like, oh man, I'm going to have to work really hard tonight because this person just doesn't do a great job or isn't really motivated the right way or the way they should be, isn't really a team player, so on and so forth. Well, that's just a part of why making sure we do a great job with hiring and getting great people in, like you, is important for our business. And if we don't, there's a real big expense to it. So you can think of turnover as like direct labor waste. It's a waste of our money to bring in people who don't fit our culture, don't fit our team, aren't the right stuff, don't have the right skill set or attitude, okay? And when we think about waste in our restaurant, food waste is not the biggest waste. It's actually direct labor waste, or it can be. So it's not just wasted time and training wages either. There's a whole lot that goes into hiring, just like all that went into hiring you. If we waste talent, we waste knowledge, we waste competence. Those are things that provide us an opportunity to give our guests a great experience. And as you remember, revenue is really impacted by the way that we treat our guests and how they remember their experiences with us. So anytime we're being dragged down by someone who just isn't the right stuff, or we're spending time investing in someone who ultimately isn't going to be a great teammate, that's a big source of waste in our business, a big waste of money, and quite frankly, a big waste of our energy and our time. So turnover and hiring expense, a big source of problems in restaurants, which is why at Rail Trail, we focus a lot on making sure that we can hire great people on our team that contribute in meaningful ways, have the right attitude, presumably just like you. So let's think about that. Like, what does it actually cost us to hire somebody? There's a lot of things that go into hiring and a lot of expenses that we incur when we do it. First and foremost, the industry, as you may or may not know, has a huge turnover rate, 73%. It's one of the most highly turned over industries out there. Restaurant people move from place to place, especially when they're in a business that isn't great for them or when they're not great for the business. Believe it or not, recent studies, this one come out of the Cornell University research down here noted at the bottom, is that it costs almost $6,000 every time we hire somebody new. We got to advertise, right? We got to put ads out. That costs money. We got to spend time scheduling and conducting interviews, usually from very high level people in the organization who are salaried employees. That costs money. We got to have a whole bunch of administration, again, by managers, supervisors. Got to have you fill out forms and payroll and set you up with all the different things, all that stuff you did on your first day. That all creates a bunch of time. And oh, by the way, when we're spending time doing that as managers, we're not spending time doing other things that are valuable to the business. Oh, by the way, we got to update all the things around our job guides and our handbooks and write new job descriptions, print the policies, update the manuals. That has an expense. Oh, by the way, we got to train everybody. So you've probably done some training shifts at this point in your time with us. Manager's time, trainer's time, and your time. That's all money that we got to spend every time we bring in somebody new to the business. And you know what? It doesn't even stop there. And you're like, I know, I can't even believe it. It doesn't stop there, though. There's even more things that are considered in turnover. What about this? When you first started in your job, are you as good as the best person on the team at doing whatever your task is? Of course you're not. So that means it's going to take new people longer to get the work done. And maybe it's going to take them a while to get it done as well as some of the veteran people on the team do it. And that means that you could be making costly mistakes, right? Like we could be making mistakes all over the restaurant. Now that's okay. Learning is really done through making mistakes, and mistakes are okay as long as they're handled the right way. But consider this note right here. The damage to productivity caused by the inexperience of new employees, that's one of the greatest contributors to the overall costs of turnover. If we're making mistakes in the line, on the kitchen, if we're making mistakes out there with the guests, that can have a real negative effect on our financial performance. So that's okay. We can deal with those mistakes if they just happen for a little while somebody's learning. But if we bring in the wrong person, or if those mistakes keep getting repeated, that's going to add up to a lot of expense over time. And ultimately, guest experience mistakes can be the most costly, especially if it means that they don't come back, okay? Look, some new folks don't work out. Hopefully, and almost certainly, that's not you. You're going to be a great member of our team. But every time we bring in somebody and they don't work out, guess what? We have to start all over again from the beginning and go through that whole process. Got to rewrite the job description, got to advertise, got to schedule interviews, got to interview, got to make the hire, got to get people through the payroll setup, got to pay to have them trained. And now we're like weeks into the process, and if they don't work out, we got to do it all over again. Okay, so hopefully now you're starting to see turnover is a real big expense here at Rail Trail. I want you to ask your mentor what the turnover cost was last year. I think you're going to be amazed by how high that number is. Crazy. It's crazy expensive to turn over people in our business. So crazy. So look, at the end of the day, we think you're going to be a great member of this team. That's why you're here. That's why we're investing in your training here in Open Book. We think that you're going to be a great member of the Rail Trail team. But managing turnover, making sure that we hire and retain the best people for our business is a really important part of managing our direct labor expense. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the third strategy around improving our direct labor. And we're going to talk about direct labor percentage now, okay? So remember, percentages are, when we're talking about expenses, what we spent on that level of expense, so what we spent on direct labor divided by revenue, okay? Meaning that if we spent $3,000 and we had on direct labor and we had $10,000 in revenue, that means that 3,000 divided by 10,000, or 3 divided by 10, we spent 30% on direct labor, okay? So by improving our revenue, we can improve our direct labor percentage without having to do anything about our direct labor expense. Like we could still spend 3,000, but our percentage would improve if we made 11,000 in revenue or 12,000 in revenue, okay? So this is one of the key strategies on direct labor that we want to employ. It's not just about cutting hours or being efficient with hours or making sure that we're hiring the right people, but it's about growing revenue with the same amount of staff in place to be able to improve our percentage, okay? Now, there's a certain type of revenue, certain types, that are especially impactful in reducing our direct labor expenses. I want you to pause this video and see if you can guess what they might be at this restaurant and why. Write down 2 different types of revenue you think might be really good in terms of reducing direct labor expense and why. Pause the video now. Come back when you're ready. Oh my God, I've been here waiting this whole time. What took you so long? No, I'm just kidding. That was great. So here's what the story is. Alcohol, 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 alcohol. Alcohol is a great way to improve our direct labor percentage. Why? Because to sell someone a beer or to sell someone a glass of wine, it takes very little labor in order to do that. Unlike what it takes to actually sell them something from the kitchen. We actually have to prepare that thing. Now, another thing that can be really good to improve our percentage is add-ons. So if they're already ordering something, we get an add-on, we add a chicken or something like that to a salad. Now all of a sudden, we're increasing the check without having to add a whole lot of extra labor. So add-ons and alcohol are great ways at Rail Trail to improve our revenue and therefore reduce our direct labor percentage. Okay, so that's about it for direct labor. We're going to summarize the key points that hopefully you learned. But remember, say it with me. The key point, the overall key point about direct labor is the sum of all the expenses required to employ our team. That's what direct labor is, okay? Your mentor is going to ask you, one of your managers is going to be walking by, ask you. You need to be able to repeat that. Direct labor is the sum of all the expenses required to employ our team, okay? And as you learned, we got a lot of different types of expenses that go into that. Next, remember that we can control and improve our direct labor by having a plan and then knowing what we actually spent, and therefore looking at the gap. The gap, remember, is the opportunity, the difference between what we thought we were going to do or what we planned to do and what we actually did. So that's one thing. Next thing is going to be about by minimizing turnover, by hiring great people, just like you, great people like you on our team that are going to be with us for a long time, that are going to make us really value the investment and training that we're making in you. You're going to be with us for a long time, be a really productive member of our team. And then finally, by growing revenue, okay, especially alcohol revenue. So we do these three things. We're going to be able to pay our people really well. Our direct labor percentage is going to be totally appropriate and in line. We're going to run a great, profitable business that's creating lots of good profit and respecting all of our stakeholders, including you. And last time, I swear I'm going to say it. Remember, direct labor, what? Say it with me now. Sum of all the expenses required to employ our team. Okay. Now we've covered two of the main three types of expenses at our restaurant, in restaurants in general. Let's move on to the next and last one, overheads. Here's the key point about overheads, okay? Overhead expenses are all the other operating expenses that are not cost of goods or direct labor, okay? So remember, cost of goods, that's the cost of the ingredients for all of our food and drink. Direct labor, that's the cost of all of the expenses that it takes to employ our team. Overhead expenses are everything else. They're all the other operating expenses that aren't cost of goods or direct labor. As you might imagine and have guessed at this point, you're going to see the slide again. So get ready, get set, here we go. All right, so when we look at overheads, we're going to break them down into 5 different subcategories because there are lots of different things that go into this category. So we need to break them down into 5 subcategories so that they get organized in a way that makes sense. First category is what we're going to call direct operating expenses. Next, marketing, advertising, and promotion. I'll bet you that one makes a lot more sense than direct operating expenses to you, but don't worry. We're going to look at each of these in detail and tell you what's in each category, and it'll all make sense at that point. Then next, we're going to call general and administrative expenses. Sometimes those are called G&A. G&A for general and administrative, okay? Next, maintenance and repairs, okay? And then finally, occupancy, okay? So these are our 5 categories of overhead expenses, and we're going to look now at each of them in detail. And when we do that, I want you to consider these questions for each subcategory. What can we control? And what are the largest contributors to expense? Okay. What can we control in each of these? What do we think we're spending the most money on? Okay. Be thinking about that because your mentor is going to be checking in with you about it. All right. So let's talk first about direct operating expenses. Now, these are going to be expenses that are specific to our industry and are required to operate our business. So these are expenses that are very specific for restaurants. We're not going to see a lot of stuff in here that a construction company or a graphic design firm or whatever would be using. Direct operating expenses mean that we need them to directly operate our business. So here are some examples. In this category, you're going to see stuff like china, flatware, glassware, okay? Tools for the kitchen, paper supplies like napkins, propane or gas, which we use to make our food. In our restaurant, that might also mean what? You know it, come on. Might need wood for the wood fire, okay? We might have some decorations and things like that in the restaurant. That's going to fall into direct operating. Linens, so chef linens, kitchen linens, things like that. Uniforms, that's going to fall into this one. Operating fees, so I don't know if you know this, but there's like tons of operating fees and licenses that we need every year to renew in order to be able to stay in business. That's part of our responsibility to local, state, and federal government. For renting equipment, many restaurants will rent their dishwashers as opposed to buying the machine itself. That's something that you're going to find in direct operating. And then finally, the tech support, point of sale, online services, things like that, that's going to fall into direct operating expense, okay? Now, linens, by the way, are one thing that we can be really efficient on. Might want to think about that the next time you grab 3 towels to go pick a spill up off the ground. Being efficient with all of these little things can add up over time. Next category we're going to look at is marketing, advertising, and promotion. So now these are expenses related to pursuing revenue and managing our reputation. And they're going to come in a lot of different categories as well. Here we're going to see things around our menu. So our menu is actually a big part of our marketing, advertising, promotion. Menu printing and design is going to fall in that. When we do advertising, that's going to fall in that. Also, when we do like social media advertising, things like that, that's going to be part of marketing advertising. If we have a graphic design firm do some work for us, their fees are going to show up here. If we're offering discounts or coupons or promotional discounts, that's going to fall into this category. When we comp our guests, which is the most effective form of advertising, that's going to show up in here. We do a lot of contributions and donations to charity at Rail Trail. If you didn't know that, you should know that. Ask your mentor about it. We do a lot to support the community, particularly Hudson, and those expenses are going to show up in here. Also, delivery services, if we happen to use one. Currently, as of this recording, we're not, but many businesses do. That could show up in this category, okay? So basically, think about this one as anything we're doing to advertise, market, or promote the business, those expenses are likely to show up in this category, and it's all based on how we're managing our reputation. Oh, by the way, let's review that key point about overheads. Overhead expenses are all other operating expenses that aren't cost of goods or direct labor. Okay, good. All right, let's move on to the next category, G&A, or general and administrative expenses. These expenses are going to be related to the administration of our business, and these are common to any industry. So if you were to be in any other kind, again, graphic design, construction company, whatever, these expenses are likely to be present in those businesses as well. So what's in them? Well, lots of different types of fees. Our business, Rail Trail, pays tons of fees to use tons of different services. We pay fees to the bank. We pay fees to the merchant processing. So that's our payroll processor or our point of sale processor. We pay lots of dues, subscriptions, books, insurance. We have to cover all kinds of different things in our business. Alcohol liability, general liability, liability. Lots of different types of insurance. If we borrow money from a bank, we need to pay interest expense. Or if we have a balance on a credit card, we got to pay interest expense. Then we have all kinds of professional fees too. If we use a lawyer, we need legal expenses. We have accounting and bookkeeping expenses to keep our numbers current and accurate. Other professional fees. When we have paper or printer toner, that stuff is part of general and administrative expense. Paying telephone, cable, internet, music and entertainment. And then we also need to pay our managers who don't necessarily work in the business, but are working on the business. That stuff fits into the G&A category. So lots of different types of fees and expenses related to any kind of business. That's what's going to show up in this one. Then the next one is maintenance and repairs, and this is all of the expenses related to maintaining our facilities and our equipment. Okay, so here you're going to see two different types of maintenance expense, and the key point here is that for maintenance, what we want to be spending our money on is preventative maintenance, maintenance that's regularly done, because that's far less expensive than the other one, which is emergency expense. So emergency maintenance expense is incredibly expensive, very inefficient, and usually could have been prevented if we did a better job of cleaning and doing good maintenance on our equipment regularly. So when you have a manager and they're like, hey, you got to clean that, or hey, you got to maintain that, there's a reason for it, and that reason is managing this expense line in our P&L. Other stuff that's going to show up in maintenance and repairs: cleaning supplies, maintaining our grease traps, pest control, cleaning services, window services, landscaping, plowing, sanding, trash removal and recycling, a big expense in this category. Okay, so maintenance and repairs is basically what it costs us to maintain our facilities and all of the equipment that we use. Okay, then finally is occupancy. And here what we're going to say is, what does it cost us to occupy and house and store things in our business? Okay, so rent, utilities are the primary drivers of what's going on here. What do we pay for rent? Any parking space rentals, real estate taxes, and then, you know, typical utilities. So electric, gas, oil, heat, water, sewer, stuff like that. Okay, we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk less specifically about the 5 categories of overheads, and for a moment about this guy right up here in the top right here. This guy's name is Pareto. Okay, and he came up with something called the 80-20 rule, or the Pareto principle. You may or may not have heard about it, but when we talk about it for a minute, you're going to actually realize, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. That's totally true. So this guy realized that 80% of the impact or resources or expenses can typically be found in 20% of the items. And this is where the 80-20 rule comes from. So this guy was an economist, a sociologist, a researcher in Italy way back in the day. And he did a study of who owned the land in Italy. And what he found was that 80% of the land in the country was held and owned by only 20% of its people. And you know what? We see this rule or principle applied all different places in life. So 20% of his pea plants also produced 80% of the peas that yielded in his garden. And oh, by the way, this is a weird and interesting one. The most frequently used 20% of words account for 80% of the word occurrences in the language. So in other words, 20% of the words show up 80% of the time that words show up. Today, another example, 20% of patients use 80% of our healthcare resources. So, you know, this isn't a hard and fast thing, but it is a general principle that is found to be true all different parts of the world, all different parts of the natural and digital world. So this is called the Pareto principle, and you may be asking yourself, nice sidetrack, I don't really get it. What does this have to do with overheads? What does it have to do with expenses? Well, the Pareto principle applies to overheads in particular because a helpful business approach is to think about, hey, what are 20% of our strategies? Because that's probably like our best strategies, because that's probably going to yield 80% of our desired results. 20% of strategies, 80% of results. 20% of our items, maybe in our overhead categories, may comprise something like 80% of our expense. Aha, you say. Now it's starting to make sense. So let's take a look at an example, okay? So for this slide, I'd like you to turn your head 90 degrees to the left and begin writing down everything that's across the bottom here on your sheet of paper. Okay, go. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that. That's silly. But this is what overhead expenses look like. There's a ton of stuff in overheads. We went through all the 5 categories, talked about all that, but we left out a lot of detail. There's tons and tons of stuff in overheads because remember, it's everything else in the restaurant that we need to operate it except for cost of goods and direct labor. So overheads has a lot of information. This is what's called a Pareto chart. So here what we have is each one of these categories, okay, is lined up by how much we spent. Now, this isn't an example for rail trail, but this is an example that we've just pulled in to demonstrate. Now, what we'll see here is that in this example, rent and payroll for the administration and our executive team are the 2 biggest contributors in this particular example. So what we're going to do on the next slide is take those out and look in a little more detail. So now, without admin and payroll, here's our new Pareto chart, okay? And over here on the right-hand side, this is the total percentage, okay? What we see is that we're going to get to, with this line right here, okay, we're going to hit that 80% mark around right here, okay? That means that 80% of our overhead expense is contained in these items right over here, okay? Which is, you know what, roughly about 20% of the things that you're seeing on the chart here. Oh my God, this guy Pareto was totally right. Everything seems to fit this 80-20 rule, okay? So why does this matter? Well, why it matters is if we're going to think about improving our overheads and trying to do a better job in managing our expenses, what we probably want to do is focus our attention here, where we're spending the most money as a percentage, and not necessarily spend a lot of time over here on things that we're not spending a whole lot of money on today. Make sense? Does it make sense? You're brilliant. Okay, next slide. All right, so you got a little activity with this week's module, and we call that the Ultimate Overheads 9000, okay? And you're going to go on a little overheads hunt. So what you're going to do is you're going to now take that overheads handout that was given to you for this module, and you're going to walk around the restaurant. Now, what I want you to do is take that sheet with you and try and find overhead expenses visually or whatever in each of the subcategories that you got. You're going to have things listed out for yourself there. And you don't have to have them physically be present to list them. So you've got the guidelines. You now know what fits into that. If you don't remember, go back, re-look at the slides, listen to me drone on boringly again, and get yourself familiar with what those are. And you can take that little handout and you can go on a walk. Okay, so walk around the restaurant and go on a little scavenger hunt, if you will. And when you're doing that, start thinking about the possibilities. Like, oh, you know what? I just saw that we were doing so-and-so with so-and-so. Like this linen thing that we're doing, I think maybe we could be a little better about that. Once you come back with some ideas when you talk to your mentor after this week's session, and tell them what you found, tell them what you think. Then, as you think about these and identify these items, I want you to rate them on a scale of 1 to 10 for both their impact, so how much they cost, how much you think we spend on them, and how controllable they are, okay? So let me give you an example. Rent is probably something that's really high in expense, okay? But you know, the way that rent works is we sign a lease, and that sort of locks in the rent for a really long time, like 3, 5, 10, maybe 15 years. Crazy. Not much we can do about that. So in that example, impact would be really high, very expensive. Controllability would be very low, very hard to control. Can't really do anything about it, okay? That makes sense? Awesome, great. So then at the end, I want you to add up total points for each expense and identify your top candidates. So if we were to start working on improving our overhead performance, where would we go? What would we do? This sort of math exercise, rating exercise, should help you identify like where you think our biggest opportunities are for improvements. And oh, by the way, guess what? This is what it means and what it looks like to be operating in an open book restaurant. You're now empowered. We want your ideas. We want you to be telling us ways that we can make this business run more efficiently, better, waste less, and be more profitable by creating more good profit. Okay? When you're done, you're going to take that sheet, you're going to discuss it with your mentor and see what you learned and get some feedback. All right, and then, oh, by the way, please remember, overhead expenses are all the other operating expenses that are not cost of goods or direct labor. Okay, so guys, you've now finished all your module work around 3 different categories of expenses. You've learned about revenue, and you learned about the profit and loss statement. You understand finance, and you know what? I want you, next time you walk around out with your friends, whatever, I want you to be like this on the next slide. You guys, I'm like totally so smart right now. You don't even know. I could totally go run a restaurant business right now if I wanted to. Okay, joking kind of, but not really. Believe it or not, you now know more about restaurant finance than I would say like 50 to 75% of people who run or own restaurants. Most people in restaurants don't even know this, but now you do. Pretty cool, right?